Norms are cultural products which represent individuals' basic knowledge of what others do and think that they should do. Sociologists describe norms as informal understandings that govern individuals' behavior in society. On the other hand, social psychology has adopted a more general definition, recognizing smaller group units, such as a team or an office, may also endorse norms separate or in addition to cultural or societal expectations. In other words, norms are regarded to exist as collective representations of acceptable group conduct as well as individual perceptions of particular group conduct. Furthermore, in the field of social psychology, the roles of norms are emphasized which can guide behavior in a certain situation or environment as mental representations of appropriate behavior. For example, it has been shown that normative messages can promote pro-social behavior, including decreasing alcohol use and increasing voter turnout. According to the psychological definition of social norms, a behavioral component. Norms have two dimensions: how much a behavior is exhibited, and how much the group approves of that behavior. Both of these dimensions can be used in normative messages to alter norms and subsequently alter behaviors. For example, a message can target the former dimension by describing high levels of voter turnout in order to encourage more turnout. At the same time, norms also can be changed contingent on the observed behavior of others. In fact, in Scherer, one Confederate was able to affect the development of a group norm related to the autokinetic effect. Norms running counter to the behaviors of the overarching society or culture may be transmitted and maintained within small subgroups of society. For example, Crandall noted that certain groups have a rate of bulimia, a publicly recognized life-threatening disease, that is much higher than society as a whole. Social norms have a way of maintaining order and organizing groups. Social control. Although not considered to be formal laws within society, norms still work to promote a great deal of social control. Social norms can be enforced formally or informally because individuals often derive physical or psychological resources from group membership. Groups are said to control discretionary stimuli. Groups can withhold or give out more resources in response to members' adherence to group norms, effectively controlling member behavior through rewards and operant conditioning. Social psychology research has found the more an individual values group-controlled resources or the more an individual sees group membership as central to his definition of self, the more likely he is to conform. Social norms also allow an individual to assess what behaviors the group deems important to its existence or survival. Since they represent a codification of belief, groups generally do not punish members or create norms over actions which they care little about. Norms in every culture create conformity that allows for people to become socialized to the culture in which they live. As social beings, individuals learn when and where it is appropriate to say certain things, to use certain words, to discuss certain topics or wear certain clothes, and when it is not. Thus, knowledge about cultural norms is important for impressions, which is an individual's regulation of their nonverbal behavior. One also comes to know through experience what types of people she can and cannot discuss certain topics with or wear certain types of dress around. Typically, this knowledge is derived through experience. Wearing a suit to a job interview in order to give a great first impression represents a common example of a social norm in the white-collar work force. Sociology. For Talcott Parsons of the functionalist school, norms dictate the interactions of people in all social encounters. On the other hand, Karl Marx believed that norms are used to promote the creation of roles in society which allows for people of different levels of social class structure to be able to function properly. Marx claims that this power dynamic creates social order. Deviance from social norms. Deviance is defined as nonconformity to a set of norms that are accepted by a significant number of people in a community or society. More simply put, If group members do not follow a norm, they become labeled as a deviant. In the sociological literature, this can often lead to them being considered outcasts of society. What is considered normal is relative to the location of the culture in which the social interaction is taking place. In psychology, an individual who routinely disobeys group norms runs the risk of turning into the institutionalized deviant, similar to the sociological definition. Institutionalized deviants may be judged by other group members for their failure to adhere to norms. At first, group members may increase pressure on a nonconformist, attempting to engage the individual in conversation or explicate why he or she should follow their behavioral expectations, especially with new members who perhaps do not know any better. Groups may use discretionary stimuli to bring an individual's behavior back into line. Over time, however, if a member continues to disobey, the group will give up on him as a lost cause. While the group may not necessarily revoke his membership, they may give him only superficial consideration. If a worker is late to a meeting, for example, violating the office norm of punctuality, a boss or other co-worker may wait for the individual to arrive and pull him aside later to ask what happened. If the behavior continues, eventually the group may begin meetings without him since the individual is always late. The group generalizes the individual's disobedience and promptly dismisses it, thereby reducing the member's influence and footing in future group disagreements. Group tolerance for deviation varies across membership. Not all group members receive the same treatment for norm violations. Individuals may build up a reserve of good behavior through conformity, which they can borrow against later. These idiosyncrasy credits provide a theoretical currency for understanding variations in group behavioral expectations. A teacher, for example, may more easily forgive a straight-A student for misbehaving, who has past good credit saved up, than a repeatedly disruptive student. While past performance can help build idiosyncrasy credits, some group members have a high balance to start with. Individuals can import idiosyncrasy credits from another group. Childhood movie stars, for example, who enroll in college, may experience more leeway in adopting school norms than other incoming freshmen. Finally, leaders or individuals in other high-status positions may begin with more credits and appear to be above the rules at times. Even their idiosyncrasy credits are not bottomless, however, while held to a more lenient standard than the average member. Leaders may still face group rejection if their disobedience becomes too extreme. Focus theory of normative conduct. Cialdini, Reno, and Calgren developed the focus theory of normative conduct to describe how individuals implicitly juggle multiple behavioral expectations at once, expanding on conflicting prior beliefs about whether cultural, situational or personal norms motivate action. The researchers suggested the focus of an individual's attention will dictate what behavioral expectation they follow. Types. Descriptive versus injunctive. Descriptive norms depict what happens, while injunctive norms describe what should happen. Cialdini, Reno, and Calgren define a descriptive norm as people's perceptions of what is commonly done in specific situations. It signifies what most people do, without assigning judgment. The absence of trash on the ground in a parking lot, for example, transmits the descriptive norm that most people there do not litter. An injunctive norm, on the other hand, transmits group approval about a particular behavior. It dictates how an individual should behave. Prescriptive and prescriptive unwritten rules that are understood and followed by society. Prescriptive norms indicate what we should do. Expressing gratitude or writing a thank you card when someone gives you a gift represents a prescriptive norm in American culture. Prescriptive norms, in contrast, comprise the other end of the same spectrum. They are similarly society's unwritten rules about what one should not do. These norms can vary between cultures. While an acceptable greeting in some European countries, kissing a stranger on the cheek constitutes a prescriptive norm in the United States. Subjective norm is determined by beliefs about the extent to which important others want him to perform a behavior. Social influences are conceptualized in terms of the pressure that people perceive from important others to perform, or not to perform, a behavior. Mathematical representations of norms. Over the last few decades, several theorists have attempted to explain social norms from a more theoretical point of view, by quantifying behavioral expectations graphically or attempting to plot the logic behind adherence. Theorists hope to be able to predict whether or not individuals would conform. The return potential model and game theory provide a slightly more economic conceptualization of norms, suggesting individuals can calculate the cost or benefit behind possible behavioral outcomes. Under these theoretical frameworks, choosing to obey or violate norms becomes a more deliberate, quantifiable decision. Return potential model developed in the 1960s. The return potential model provides a method for plotting and visualizing group norms. In the regular coordinate plane, the amount of behavior exhibited is plotted on the x-axis while the amount of group acceptance or approval gets plotted on the y-axis. The graph represents the potential return or positive outcome to an individual for a given behavioral norm. Theoretically, one could plot a point for each increment of behavior how much the group likes or dislikes that action. For example, it may be the case that among first-year graduate students, strong social norms around how many daily cups of coffee you drink exist. If the return curve in Figure 1 correctly displays the example social norm, we can see that if someone drinks 0 cups of coffee a day, the group strongly disapproves. The group does not approve of member behavior until someone hits 4 cups of coffee a day. The graduate students find it excessive to drink more than 7 cups. However, as the approval again dips below 0, as exhibited by the coffee example, the return potential model displays for each increment of behavior how much group approval one can anticipate. Point of maximum return. The point with the greatest y-coordinate is called the point of maximum return, as it represents the amount of behavior the group likes the best. While C in Figure 1 is labeling the return curve in general, the highlighted point just above it at x equals 6 represents the point of maximum return. Extending our above example, the point of maximum return for first-year graduate students would be 6 cups of coffee. They receive the most social approval for drinking exactly that many cups. Any more or any fewer cups would decrease the approval. Range of tolerable behavior. Label D represents the range of tolerable behavior, or the amount of action the group finds acceptable. It encompasses all the positive area under the curve. In Figure 1, the range of tolerable behavior extends as 3, as the group approves of all behavior from 4 to 7 and 7 to 4 equals 3. Carrying over our coffee example again, we can see that first years only approve of having a limited number of cups of coffee. More than 7 cups or fewer than 4 would fall outside the range of tolerable behavior. Norms can have a narrower or wider range of tolerable behavior. Typically, a narrow range of behavior indicates a behavior with greater consequences to the group. Intensity. The intensity of the norm tells how much the group cares about the norm, or how much group effect is at stake to be won or lost. It is represented in the return potential model by the total amount of area subsumed by the curve, regardless of whether the area is positive or negative. A norm with low intensity would not vary far from the x-axis. The amount of approval or disapproval for given behaviors would be closer to 0. A high-intensity norm, however, would have more extreme approval ratings. In Figure 1, the intensity of the norm appears high, as few behaviors invoke a rating of indifference. Crystallization. Finally, norm crystallization refers to how much variance exists within the curve, translated from the theoretical back to the actual norm. It shows how much agreement exists between group members about the approval for a given amount of behavior. It may be that some members believe the norm more central to group functioning than others. A group norm like how many cups of coffee first years should drink would probably have low crystallization, since a lot of individuals have varying beliefs about the appropriate amount of caffeine to imbibe. In contrast, the norm of not plagiarizing another student's work would likely have high crystallization, as people uniformly agree on the behavior's unacceptability, showing the overall group norm. The return potential model in Figure 1 does not indicate the crystallization. However, a return potential model that plotted individual data points alongside the cumulative norm could demonstrate the variance and allow us to deduce crystallization. Game theory. Another general formal framework that can be used to represent the essential elements of the social situation surrounding a norm is the repeated game of game theory. A norm gives a person a rule of thumb for how they should behave. However, a rational person only acts according to the rule if it is optimal for them. The situation can be described as follows. A norm gives an expectation of how other people act in a given situation. A person acts optimally given the expectation. For a norm to be stable, people's actions must reconstitute the expectation without change. A set of such correct stable expectations is known as a Nash equilibrium. Thus, a stable norm must constitute a Nash equilibrium. From a game theoretical point of view, there are two explanations for the vast variety of norms that exist throughout the world. One is the difference in games. Different parts of the world may give different environmental contexts, and different people may have different values, which may result in a difference in games. The other is equilibrium selection, not explicable by the game itself. Equilibrium selection is closely related to coordination. For a simple example, driving is common throughout the world, but in some countries people drive on the right and in other countries people drive on the left. A framework called comparative institutional analysis is proposed to deal with the game theoretical structural understanding of the variety of social norms.